Children's and Household Tales. That's the original title of a collection of stories that are today known as the Grimm's fairy tales. The Brothers Grimm devoted their life's work to collecting and preserving German folk tales. They believed these stories were the purest manifestation of German culture, and through them, these tales became a part of the world's heritage. We might know their stories, but there's little we know about the brothers themselves. So today, we tell the story of the Brothers Grimm. Cinderella, the Frog Prince, Little Red Riding Hood, the Pied Piper. All are stories known throughout the world by children and people of all ages. But if not for the Brothers Grimm, few of these tales would have reached our ears. Jakob and Wilhelm Grimm spent their lives gathering, rewriting, and publishing the many folk stories of the German nation. But why? Let's start at the very beginning. Jakob and Wilhelm were born in 1785 and 1786 in the town of Hanau, in what was then the Landgraviate of Hesse-Kassel. They were two of a family of 9 children born to Philip and Dorothea Grimm. When they were 5 and 6 years old, they moved to Steinau, where their father became a magistrate. Their family were prominent members of the community, and the children were educated at home by private tutors. But the Grimm family's life took a turn for the worst in 1796. Philip died of pneumonia and the family fell into great poverty. The servants were relinquished, their house sold, and Jakob Grimm, aged 11, had to quickly assume adult responsibilities, joined by Wilhelm. Their grandfather lent a helping hand, but 2 years later he also passed away. By this time both were in Kassel to attend the Friedrich Gymnasium, and because of the hardships the two brothers were exceptionally close. All they could rely on was each other. Even though they were made aware of their inferior social class relative to highborn students, the brothers excelled in their studies and managed to graduate as heads of their classes. They joined the ranks of the University of Marburg but were not treated equally. Both were initially disqualified from admission due to their social standing and received no stipends or tuition aids. Because of their extreme poverty, they couldn't take part of student activities and were completely excluded from the university's social life. But in hindsight, this worked in their favor. Jakob and Wilhelm pursued their studies with extra vigor. And it was at this stage that the brothers gained an interest in history and philology and began studying medieval German literature. Friedrich von Savigny was the law professor of Jakob and Wilhelm, and it was he who introduced them to the idea that German literature should revert to simpler, natural forms. He was also a supporter of the unification of the 200 German principalities. Thanks to him, the brothers engaged with ardor in the studying of Old German language and literature. In 1805, Jakob Grimm accepted a post in Paris as von Savigny's research assistant. But when he returned, he abandoned his studies. He was financially responsible for his mother, brother, and younger siblings. The family was living in horrible conditions. In his letter written to his aunt, he wrote, "We 5 people only eat 3 portions and only once a day." When he found a full-time job as a court librarian, his mother died, and Jakob became solely responsible for the entire family. Even so, he managed to pay for the art studies of Ludwig, his younger brother, who would later become a painter and art professor. He also paid for Wilhelm's treatments for heart and respiratory ailments. When he finished treatment, Wilhelm joined his brother as a court librarian. This job didn't pay well, but it gave them ample time for research, and at the request of German poet Clemens Brentano, in 1807 they began collecting folk tales. Initially, they didn't realize the significance of this undertaking and couldn't devote all their energies to their research. Nevertheless, in 1812, they published their first volume of 86 folk tales, Kinder- und Hausmärchen, Children's and Household Tales. They quickly followed up with 2 volumes of German legends and a volume of early literary history. They went on to publish works about Danish and Irish folk tales and Norse mythology. By 1830, their works were so widely recognized that the brothers received honorary doctorates from universities in Marburg, Berlin, and Breslau. Despite their successes, both brothers were overlooked when the post of chief librarian became available. This disappointed them greatly, so they moved their household to Göttingen, where Jakob became a professor at the university and Wilhelm was the head librarian. During the next 7 years, the brothers continued to research, write, and publish. Their hallmark collection of fairy tales was edited, expanded, and republished several times, and both became well respected in this newly established discipline. But in 1837, they joined their colleagues in protest against Ernest Augustus, King of Hanover, who dissolved the parliament and demanded oaths of allegiance from civil servants. Both lost their posts at the university and moved back to Kassel. By this time, Wilhelm was married to Henriette Dorchen and had 4 children. Jakob never married but continued to live in the household with Wilhelm. Left again without an income in 1838, the brothers began what would become their lifelong project, the writing of a definitive dictionary, the Deutsches Wörterbuch. The first volume was not published until 1854, and they never finished it because this was an intensely elaborate project. The dictionary contained the etymology, meanings, attested forms, synonyms, usage peculiarities, and regional differences of words found throughout the German-speaking world. In fact, they only completed the letters A to E, and scholars and institutions continued the work until 1961, when it was finally completed. This work exceeded the expectations of the Grimms. The press called it a great national work, and its first shipment sold 10,000 copies. So in 1840, thanks also to their former professor von Savigny, Jakob and Wilhelm were offered posts at the University of Berlin. In addition, the Academy of Sciences offered them stipends, grants, to continue their research. Jakob resigned in the 1840s and Wilhelm continued until 1852. After retiring from teaching, the brothers devoted themselves to the German dictionary for the rest of their lives. At the age of 73, Wilhelm passed away from an infection and Jakob continued his work on the dictionary until his own death at 78. Symbolically, the last word he worked on was fruit. What the brothers left behind is a cultural treasure. The Grimm's fairy tales are listed by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage. They aided the revival of popular culture with the conviction that national identities could be found in common folk tales and were a reflection of the nation's cultural identity. The collections were not intended to be stories to be read to children, but as scholarly treatises. The preservation of the tales that have been handed down from generation to generation, a practice threatened by the increase of industrialization, was also their aim. Furthermore, the brothers saw fragments of old religions reflected in these stories, which they thought continued to survive through folk tales. Some of the stories came from peasants, others from middle-class or aristocratic acquaintances. Some stories originated in written form during the Middle Ages, others came purely from oral traditions. The brothers also rewrote some stories to gather different versions under one narrative, even when they weren't purely of Germanic origins. Some tales, like Little Red Riding Hood, had existed in many versions throughout Europe, but the Grimms appropriated them as uniquely German because they believed they reflected Germanic culture. In the later, expanded versions of the fairy tales, the Grimms made them stylistically similar, added dialogue, improved the plots, and incorporated psychological, spiritual, and religious motifs. To improve the narrative, some stories were expanded so much that they grew to twice the length that they were in the earliest published editions. So as I said, what the Grimms collected was not intended as children's tales. The legends, novellas, and folk stories that circulated throughout the nation contained some questionable scenes. In fact, the brothers had to introduce a cautionary advice that parents steer children towards age-appropriate stories. Why? Well, some stories showed children being eaten, murder, sex, rape. You get the idea. For instance, in the Grimm's original version of Snow White, the queen is her biological mother, not her stepmother. So it's Snow White's own mother who sends out the huntsman to kill her and, by the way, requests the child's lungs and liver so that she can eat them. The original story ends with the queen dancing at Snow White's wedding, wearing a pair of red-hot iron shoes that kill her. Another lesser-known story is the Goose Girl. In it, a servant is stripped naked and pushed into a barrel studded with sharp nails, then rolled down the street. The Frog Prince is a bit violent too in the Grimm's version. Instead of kissing him, the princess originally threw the frog against the wall. And the first version of Rapunzel clearly shows a sexual relationship between the prince and the girl in the tower. While these might shock us a bit today, the original stories contain cruelty and violence because cruelty and violence were a part of medieval culture from which the tales originated. The Brothers Grimm didn't eliminate any of these stories as they believed they reflected inherent cultural qualities. In later versions though, they did sanitize many of these stories. The Deutsche Sagen was another important work of the Brothers Grimm. The German Legends is a collection of 579 short summaries. They don't only refer to German legends, but also early Germanic myths. In it, you'll find pretty much all of the hallmarks of Germanic stories: magic, dwarves, giants, kobolds, the devil, ghosts, and wild hunts. Historical legends that begin from Latin sources of ancient Germany up to medieval and early modern folklore have been gathered in this collection. The relevance and importance of such a work cannot be understated in the study of national cultures. Such stories are in fact regarded today as foundation stones of national identities. The Deutsche Sagen is also the book that contains the most popular version of the Pied Piper, a disturbing story of the rat catcher of Hamelin that lured away the children, never to be seen again. This is one of the legends believed to be based on true events, although scholars don't really know what exactly happened. Just like in the fairy tales, the German legends also include stories that are not, let's say, suitable. Some stories of medieval origin record anti-Semitic beliefs. The Jew's stone, the Jew among thorns, the girl who was killed by Jews. I mean, the title says it all. While no longer acceptable, these stories do reflect the times they were created in and are part of the cultural heritage. Unfortunately, these stories became a focal point of the Nazi Party's narrative, who used the Grimm's work to push their own narrative. The legacy of two humble brothers from Hanau is immensely valuable. In their research, the brothers made a science of the study of folklore and created a model of research that sparked a new fieldwork in most European countries. They basically set the standards for research and analysis of stories and legends. In the 20th century, their collections laid the foundations of Walt Disney's empire with the release of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. The story of the Grimms was retold, and the mindset of good over evil, innocence over oppression was imprinted in the minds of the people who lived through the bloodiest and most murderous century in human history. Other stories like Cinderella, a story of a poor girl finding love and success, created a motif that's been repeated in movies over and over again. The debate on whether the brutality and violence of the original stories should remain included or not is ongoing to this day. Nevertheless, children and adults alike remain enamored of the Grimm's fairy tales. For the two brothers, life was harsh, and they found refuge and salvation in their studies. Their hard work and diligence left us with age-old stories that have been retold for centuries and will continue to endure for centuries to come. I hope this video was interesting enough to have inspired you to look into it further on your own. If you liked it, leave a like and subscribe. You can leave your comments downstairs, and you can also check out my Patreon page if you want to support me. The link is in the description. I hope to see you next time. Bye.